The year is 328 BCE, and once again tension in central Italy is beginning to rise. The Samnites and the Romans were locked in a fierce battle for influence over the region, and so far it seemed as though the Romans were the clear favorites. They had just recently humiliated the Samnites in the First Samnite Roman War during the years of 343, 342, and 341 BCE. With their victory, Rome had not only managed to push the border between the two polities further into what had been recognized Samnite territory, but they had also managed to gain the allegiance, or at least the cooperation, of the Campanians, a very rich people located in, you guessed it, Campania. In the intervening years, a period of about 13 years, the Romans and the Samnites had not directly challenged one another. Instead, they had been competing in an influence war. Rome would gain the allegiance or an alliance with the city-state here, while the Samnites would gain the same with the city-state over there. This game, though, was about to change, and with this change, a new war would break out that would decide who would lay claim to central Italy. What caused this change? Why did war break out? And who would ultimately be victorious? Let's talk about it. Now, I did get a little bit ahead of myself. To really examine this war, we actually need to start in the year 337 BCE, with the return of our old friends, the Sidicni. The Sidicni had been the people that the First Samnite War had originally started over, and they were back in the mix once again. This time, though, the Sidicni had declared war upon the Aurunci, another Italic group in Campania. The Romans felt the need to get involved on the side of the Aurunci, due to the fact that they had refused the demands of the Samnites to fight against Rome during the First Samnite War. At first, the war was really going against the Aurunci, and their capital city, Aruncia, was destroyed, and they were forced to flee to Susia Aruncia. Yeah, they weren't very creative. It was at this point that Rome finally entered the fray. In 335 BCE, one of the Roman consuls, we're unsure exactly who, captured the town of Clay, the capital city of the Aunci, an ally of the Sidicni. The Romans took this opportunity to set up their own colony in the city. The Romans then went from town to town in the territory of the Sidicni, destroying and looting. In Samnium, a growing faction within Samnite leadership pushed for the Samnites to declare war on the Romans now. However, it seems the war ended too quickly for the Samnites to really put anything on the stone. Over the next few years, an uneasy feeling of tension would spread across the area as each side, Roman and Samnite, competed for and secured the loyalty of various city-states and towns. However, this would all boil over in 328 BCE. The trouble really starts at a town in Campania called Fragile. Fragile had been founded sometime during the 4th century BCE and had originally been inhabited by the Ausians, before eventually passing into the hands of the Volsci. And at some point just before 330 BCE, the Samnites had sacked and destroyed the town, leaving behind little to no survivors. For 2 years, the site remained unoccupied, until in 328 BCE, the Romans set up a colony at the site of the former town. The Samnites were certainly not happy with this, but if this had been the only event to occur in 328, then the two sides likely wouldn't have gone to war. But around the same time as the establishment of the new colony, a city-state known as Paliopolis began to feud with Rome. Paliopolis, as the name kind of implies, is actually the old city of what would become Neapolis, or modern-day Naples. The city had been founded by the Mycenaeans sometime during the 2nd millennium BCE, and while the city came nowhere near to the level of prestige, power, or influence that Naples would eventually have, the city and its inhabitants were certainly no pushovers. We don't know exactly what happened, but Livy tells us that for some reason Paliopolis' rulers ordered an attack or a series of attacks on Romans living in Campania. This was likely due to Rome's increasing power in the region. Rome demanded some form of redress, but Paliopolis refused, and Rome quickly declared war shortly thereafterwards. In 327 BCE, 2 Roman armies marched from Rome for Campania. At their heads were the 2 consuls for the year, Quinticus Publius Philo and Lucius Cornelius Lentulus. Philo moved towards Paliopolis and Naples, who it seemed had allied with Paliopolis, while Lentulus stayed back further inland and monitored the movements of the Samnites. He did this because Roman scouts and spies had noticed that the Samnites were levying new troops, and a rumor in the Samnite political sphere was that this was actually a first step towards a widespread rebellion or uprising against Rome in Campania. Considering the circumstances, I'd say it was pretty reasonable for Lentulus to remain behind. These rumors eventually reached Rome, and they had further developed to include tales that the Samnites were actively fomenting rebellions in the towns of Pravernium, Fundi, and Formi, 3 Volscian towns that had recently come under the influence of Rome. In response to these rumors, the Senate sent envoys to the Samnites and basically told them to tell the Samnites to quit their shit. The Samnites played dumb and denied that they were preparing for war. They further denied the rumors that they were fomenting any sort of rebellion anywhere, and refuted the claim that they had already sent troops to aid Paliopolis in its struggle against Rome. They further complained of the Roman settlement at Frigile, and even, either directly or indirectly, pushed the Roman envoys to declare war in Campania. Philo, likely ignorant of the wider going-ons of the Roman and Samnite stare-down, moved to take the city of Paliopolis. He recognized that he needed to divide the 2 towns if he was going to get anything done. Frankly though, this was a risky strategy. While physically positioning his army between the 2 towns would isolate them, it also ran the risk of exposing his army to a multi-pronged attack. Philo, though, felt the risk was worth it, and moved his army to a position between the 2 towns. Something very interesting happened here though, and we should take a quick moment to discuss it, as its impact will be felt in later Roman history. Technically, the 2 consuls were coming up on the end of their terms. The 2 should have returned to Rome, where they would oversee the election of new consuls, who would then be given the ability to command the armies. However, the Senate, likely recognizing that things were simply too tense right now to even consider a change in command, passed a resolution extending the military command of the 2 consuls, while their political powers expired and were handed over to new consuls. Philo and Lentulus were now titled proconsuls, and were given the same level of military command that a regular consul would receive until the campaigns were resolved. This is something that will occur several times in later Roman history, but as far as we know, this is the first recorded instance of such a thing occurring. This meant that Rome basically had 4 consuls in 326. Philo and Lentulus were military consuls, while Gaius Potelius Libo Volsus and Lucius Papirius Cursor were the year's regular consuls. While not super important to our story for today, this was an important moment in Roman history, and the beginning of a practice that we would see several more times in Roman history. Anyway, back to the war. We are told that in 326 BCE, a group of leading men in Naples were apparently dissatisfied with the way that the quote, Samnite troops were acting in their city. Remember that on paper, the Samnites had not actually sent troops to the conflict, but in practice, this was a contingent of Samnite troops. The Romans knew it, the Neapolitans knew it, and even the Samnites knew it. Anyway, the leading men decided that they no longer wanted to take part in this war, and engineered some sort of plot, we have no idea exactly what this means, that allowed the Romans to take the city. The new leadership in Naples now called for a renewed treaty of friendship with Rome, and the city was no longer a threat to the Roman troops camped between them and Paliopolis. Now, this seems to have pushed the Roman and Samnite tension over the edge, and war was officially declared. Rome, led by Lentulus, took the towns of Alife, Calife, and Rufurium in Samnium, and the Lucanians and the Apulians both allied with Rome against the Samnites. The Samnites got their own alliance with the Vestini, a group of peoples who lived on the Adriatic coast to the northeast of Samnium proper. In 325 BCE, the consul Decimus Junius Bruttius Scavia ravaged the territory of the Vestini and took 2 towns, Contini and Singalia. This is where a man by the name of Lucius Papirius Cursor enters our story. If you were paying attention, I already mentioned his name a moment ago as one of the Romans elected consul for the year 326. However, at least in terms of Samnite war activity, he didn't really do a whole lot that year. Instead, his moment of glory for the war would come in the already mentioned 325. Now, we don't really know why. We are only given the vague excuse of illness, but the regular consul for the year, Lucius Furius Camillus, was unable to command any troops. Because of this inability, the consul and the Senate recognized that Rome needed someone to take his place and command the Second Army of the Republic. Enter Lucius Papirius Cursor. Cursor was appointed dictator. This is a little odd considering that the other consul, Decimus Junius Bruttius Scavia, seemed to be doing just fine, but Livy still tells us that Lucius Cursor became dictator, so I guess we kind of just have to roll with that. Anyway, Lucius quickly assumed command in the army, and appointed Quinticus Fabius Maximus Rullianus as his master of the horse. The 2 set off to Samnium and began their campaign. However, early on, Lucius discovered that the auspices had not been taken correctly, and returned to Rome to rectify the issue. This left Rullianus as the commander of the Roman army. However, Lucius expressly forbade Rullianus from engaging the enemy. Rullianus, though, ignored the instructions and gave battle to a Samnite army at Invernium, where he quickly crushed the force. Rullianus quickly sent a letter to the Senate, telling of his victory, and supposedly even burnt the spoils of war in an effort to ensure that Lucius couldn't use any of them in a triumph. Which sounds like quite a bit of bad blood. But it only gets worse. You see, shortly after this victory, Lucius heard of the battle and was absolutely enraged. No one was supposed to go against the order of a dictator. His word was law, and to even question his word was a horrid crime in the eyes of Rome, much less willfully disobeying a direct order. Lucius rushed back to camp, where he immediately sentenced Rullianus to death. The army, the Senate, and even the tribune of the plebs begged Lucius to reconsider, but Lucius remained steadfast in his belief that Rullianus must be punished. In fact, it seems as though Lucius was actually quite pleased with the victory. After all, who wouldn't be? But Lucius firmly believed that allowing any sort of questioning of the dictator's authority ran the risk of devaluing the position, and allowing others to begin to question the ultimate authority of the position. The death order was only cancelled when both Rullianus and his father fell to their knees before Lucius and begged for forgiveness. This placated Lucius, and he allowed the incident to end. Now, to burst the bubble just a little bit, this story is a little questionable. First of all, why would a dictator be needed in the first place? There was another consul easily capable of leading a second army. Why would you usurp him when only one consul was apparently incapacitated? Secondly, this event bears a striking resemblance to the later events between the dictator Fabius Maximus, who's actually Rullianus' grandson, and his master of the horse, Marcus Massinius Rufus, in 217 BCE. So, was this just another invention by Livy? Well, possibly. Is it also possible that this story is true? Sure. We will never know for sure. Personally, I believe that there is a kernel of truth somewhere in the story. I believe that the two probably did quarrel, either over positioning or which battle to take, but that the details of the events are greatly exaggerated by Livy. But let me know what you think down below. The war continued on either way. At some point during 324 BCE, Lucius inflicted a grave defeat on the Samnites, and it did enough damage that the Samnites sued for peace. In a show of good faith, Lucius left the region while negotiations took place. However, the two sides couldn't come to an agreement on a permanent peace plan, and so a one-year truce was agreed to while the finer details of peace were worked out. Apparently, though, Lucius was not happy with such a thing, and began to instruct his army to prepare for war once again. The Samnites noticed this and quickly summoned their own armies, and hostilities broke out once again. At this point, there was also some trouble in Apula, as one of the groups in the region, the Diani, declared war upon Rome. We believe it was likely the Diani, as it is their land which was caught up in the war, but to be fair, we aren't really sure. And even if it was, the Diani were really just a collection of various independent city-states, so we aren't really sure who exactly became enemies of Rome. In any case, the consuls for the next year, 323, were sent to battle on two fronts. Gaius Sulpicius Longus went to Samnium, while Quinticus Aemilius Cutanius went to Apula. There were no large battles to speak of, but areas of both fronts were laid to waste, and the Romans pillaged much of the countryside. In 322, rumors were going around that the Samnites were looking to hire mercenaries from abroad. In response to these rumors, Aulus Cornelius Cossus Arvana was appointed dictator and instructed to deal with the Samnites before they were able to receive reinforcement from the mercenaries. Cossus marched straight to Samnium and set up camp somewhere in Samnite territory. The Samnites gave chase, and eventually Cossus was forced to confront the Samnite force. But battle did not happen immediately, as when they caught up to each other, nightfall was fast approaching. The two sides set up camp for the night, and it looked as though the next morning would be a bloodbath. However, Cossus, likely uncomfortable with his position, planned to sneak away during the night to more favorable terrain. This retreat was noticed by the Samnites, and before the retreat could fully finish, the Samnite cavalry began to engage the Romans. The Romans attempted to quickly put down defensive fortifications, but were unable to do so without being harassed by Samnite cavalry, and so Cossus instructed his entire force to prepare for battle. The two sides charged at each other, and the true battle commenced. The fighting was extremely close for a time, and neither side truly gained any sort of advantage. For 5 hours the battle raged on. Finally, the Samnites noticed that the Romans had left their baggage train undefended. A portion of the Samnite army broke off to loot the baggage train. But this left the main force slightly disorganized, while the detachment that went for the baggage train were now exposed to a cavalry charge, as their flanks were undefended. Cassius quickly noticed this, and he took advantage of the situation. He ordered his master of the horse, Marcus Fabius, to charge the Roman cavalry into the Samnite detachment that had gone for the baggage train. This was apparently a slaughter, and the Samnite detachment was quickly decimated. This had a serious effect on the morale of both sides. The Samnites felt demoralized as they saw their comrades be butchered, while the Romans were sent into a near frenzy with the successful charge. Marcus Fabius then wheeled around to the main Samnite force and charged once again. This, combined with the greatly increased Roman morale and decreased Samnite morale, quickly resulted in a rout, and the Romans won the day. Livy tells us that this defeat was so humiliating and costly for the Samnites that they offered Rome their surrender, but the Romans refused. This would turn out to be a mistake for the Republic. For now, it seemed the war was far from over. The Republic had so far been successful in basically every engagement, and it looked as though they would easily continue to roll over the Samnites. They were so confident of this fact that they ignored the aforementioned surrender. But this would prove to be a mistake. So what happened in the later stages of the war? Why was this a mistake? And what course would the war eventually take? Join me next time to find out. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. If you have any comments or questions on the video or believe I've made a mistake, please comment down below, and please like and subscribe if you enjoyed. It really helps the channel out. Peace.